Hello, Sonia. Thank you so much for coming onto my podcast with me.
Hi, I am beyond thrilled to be here.
I'm excited to have you because this is like such an interesting perspective I guess I say that everybody has such a different life that I'm always like, this is such an blah, blah, blah. perspective.
Yeah, well, it's really wonderful to be able to learn from so many different people. And I feel like, especially nowadays in um, spirituality and even in just learning of curating all the different things that work for you so that you can make choices that empower you instead of having to make your life fit into a certain mold. So I love the conversation that you're bringing to the table. And I love that I get to be one of your guests.
Yay. One of my guests and my guides. This is great. All
Yay.
right. So I'm just going to start at the beginning with you because really we could go in all different directions. And I was looking at you guys' website, you and your sister Sabrina's website this morning, just grabbing words and everything. And I love that this new term modern mystic is coming around, but you're from 5 generations of, how would we word this, modern mystics of the time. Would you give me like maybe like a brief history of you guys, and then like we'll go into your childhood?
Yeah. So, yeah, my sister and I, who unfortunately is obviously not here today, but we come from a long lineage of intuitives. My grandmother grew up actually in Romania, was a prisoner of war, a prisoner of war, and married my grandfather. She learned about intuition from her mom, who learned about intuition from her mom. And she married my grandfather, who moved her to Iowa many moons ago. But she also was hard of hearing. And she said that because she wasn't able to hear words in a sense, that she really worked on vibration and learned how to get underneath what people were saying in order to really resonate with what was true. And so spirituality, having a connection to spirit, having a connection with your intuition, which for us is your inner teacher, your inner guide, was our first language. So my grandmother, my Nana, taught my mom and her whole family not only about intuition, but of really how to trust themselves, how to trust their intuition and use that as a compass to navigate. And that our intellect is really meant to be in service to that deeper part of ourselves. And so my sister and I grew up with a mom, with intuition that was something that was very normalized. It was like and in a way, it was our biggest gift because I learned how to navigate not only with thinking, but with feeling. And so my sister and I, we traveled around the world with my mom in workshops, teaching, doing readings, all sorts of different things. And for me, I really, I graduated college in 2010, and I found that so many of my peers, especially during the economic housing crisis, that they didn't have a connection with their intuition and really felt that they were stuck. And so, my sister and I believe, are not only on a soul mission, but that I really got into this as wanting to teach my friends these really important tools. And, I believe that intuition is the way that we're supposed to live. It's our first sense. So really trying to teach people how to replug back into themselves instead of always trying to figure out life, which is tiring.
I've been struggling. I even feel like with the last month, like I'm like, I feel like I know the bigger picture. Why is the bigger picture not helping right now?
Well, I would say a lot of different things. I feel like, in terms of a lot of times we know the bigger picture, but intuition works best in the immediate. And our intellect, which is like I said, meant to be the best of friends with our intuition, wants to know what the whole path ahead is going to look like. And oftentimes that gets us into a place of not being able to trust the present moment, which is where we feel and connect to our intuition. You know, we have our heads, which pick up on our information, our intellect, which is a great tool. We have our emotions that come in and out like waves. And then we have our intuition, which is that deeper part of ourselves that trusts to the present, you know, connects to that present moment. So, you know, I find that there's a lot of times, and even having grown up in this, even having all of those different tools, there are times for me too, where I am like, why, what am I doing? What's going on? And then I have to remember to get back into my body, back into the present moment, and start to do some deeper listening and be available.
All right. So I want to shoot back to your childhood in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like? Because let's be honest, like, I feel now, having been a mother, I feel like I've been two mothers, and I feel like a lot of people can be, and I'm sure I'll be multiple mothers after this too. But like, let's call like my first one, like very mainstream mother who I was not using my intuition. There, that part of the world, that spiritual part of the world was not there for me. Not that it wasn't there for me. It wasn't, I wasn't aware of it at the moment. So I was definitely running the regular rat race and the regular formula. And here nor there, that regular is probably not the word, but, and then we had this second mother who was so much more, who I'm so much more aware of it. And I can reframe things, and I realize how much play is important for my children's intuition, and how much being present and part of it. It's not just like make, you know, good for my children. It's such a giant piece. So I'd like, your childhood is interesting because your mother came into it with this perspective, and not only just came into it before she had children, you know, you have generations down the line. So then there's you who, you know, you and your sister who may not, you know, had to do things a little bit differently, or you came into the world in a different situation. So I'd love to hear what that was like.
Yeah. Well, you know, the biggest thing that I would say is that we grew up in a very playful, connected home and space. So growing up, we would talk about our vibes or our guides, or if my sister, I ever had a bad vibe about being anywhere, about an adult, about anything, we could squeeze our mom's hand 2 times. And that was like the signal that we needed to get out. But, you know, we would also play games all the time, like who's calling on the phone? Obviously, this is a 4-caller ID, or what is the next license, first like letter or number of the license plate going to be? Or, you know, and so for us, it was so normal that I didn't realize it wasn't normal until I got older, until I started going over to some of my friends' houses and realized that not only did a lot of kids not only have this languaging, but when I was younger, intuition and spirituality has become a lot more mainstream, and psychic and psycho growing up was not big, that much of a difference. So it was, I was completely oblivious until I was probably in like 2nd or 3rd grade. And in a lot of ways, it was great because at home, I had this really incredible world and container where I was nurtured and validated. But it also could be very difficult being out in the real world. My sister and I were very different. My sister was someone who came into the world very loud and proud and unabashedly, I am who I am. She came in singing and dancing. While I was a little bit more shy and sensitive in a different way. So for me, I actually ended up in mostly middle school and even in high school and beginning college, I was actually really closeted. So at home, I would have, we talk about guides, we learn how to do readings. We would, just had intuition and spirituality at the center of our lives. But in the bigger world, felt like I needed to hide. And so it wasn't until like college when I really came out of the closet. But having parents who were so not only intuitive, but aware and curious and interested in our intuition and in our guidance was, I think, the biggest gift that I could have gotten, because it really taught me and Sabrina to like trust ourselves. And also because like you were saying so beautifully earlier, intuition is creativity and being able to play and be available. So having a house where the intellect wasn't the most important thing gave us a really beautiful space to be able to create and play and connect not only the X axis, but the Y axis.
I think also too, because I know a few people that intellect in their family, and I don't know if this is so much of a judgment. I hope it doesn't come off as a judgment. Intellect in their family is very, very, very important, to the point of using it to hurt somebody else. And it's like, I know something you don't know, and I don't know if that's their way of play, but now also too, it's not always like a one-upping game. But when you're like play, it's all about the connection. It's all about like what we can do together. And I just, I love how you said, like, you're like, I didn't realize this wasn't normal until I started going over to other people's houses. Well, when I was little, it was normal. Like when kids were left alone, they were doing these things, you know?
Definitely.
Not
I
so
mean,
much doing it with your parents. I mean, not that I saw.
yeah. Well, two things. A, the intellect doesn't play. It can't play because the intellect lives in right and wrong, good and bad, black and white. And the intellect, as I've said many times, is meant to be in service to spirit. But it also is a place where we learn how to protect ourselves. We come into the world as these really open, sweet beings. And, we suffer a lot of different injuries, whether it's from families that we, incarnate into, or just the world at large. And so we develop these really strong intellects as a way to try and protect ourselves. And like you said so beautifully, kids use their intuition all the time because they're in the present moment. They'll tell, and that's why I love kids, because they're truth serum. They don't have that same idea of trying to, be polite or, make you like them. They're like, I don't like that person, or that feels good, or, or even watching kids with their imaginary friends. A lot of times I feel like that's even just opening up to this whole other portal and world of different types of vibration that a lot of times we learn to not only we get checked out of our bodies and deaden ourselves to, but where we also get very afraid of judgment, which is where I feel like a lot of times we really learn to shut ourselves down as a way to try and connect.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Oh.
Yeah, to make yourself small. I even noticed I always question myself with that too, because, going out socially, right? I know what I want to talk about, but I know that's not usually what everyone else talks about. And, I always wonder if I'm making myself smaller so I can get in. But
Mm-hmm.
then I realize that's not the case, because if somebody asks me a big question, right? Like a big, deep question about, let's just say, incarnation or something like that, I will give it to them, but you're right. Like, so often of us make ourselves smaller so we feel like we can connect with a group.
Yeah. And, two things. I find that a lot of times, and I think it's because I can relate to this in my own journey of how I grew up in this very connected, supported, incredible family, but out in the world, I didn't feel like I was safe. And there's a beautiful quote by Seneca the Younger that's, we suffer more in our imaginations than we do in reality. And for me, I find that especially nowadays, people are feeling more and more and more disconnected and are really craving deeper connection, and that people can feel uncomfortable at times because it's just something different. But also what I found, because I uh, felt like I wasn't safe, was that actually when I started to talk about it, and when I was talked about my intuition. I remember when I was in college, I was doing readings and mentoring. I would do mentoring in my car, like secretly, or do readings like secretly in my car. And I had this idea of like, all right, I'm going to come out of the closet and tell all my friends that I'm an intuitive and this is who I am. And I rehearsed myself. I was like, okay, I'm going to pumping myself up, Sonia, here you go. And this is what I'm going to say. And people actually not only got it, but people were a lot more curious. And
Yeah.
sometimes people who are like, I feel a little uncomfortable in the beginning, would loop back around and want to talk to me about it. So in a way, I find that our job is to be ambassadors and normalize the conversation by also just recognizing that having not only a spiritual life or a connection to your spirit is part of who we are, and it's not weird or a big deal, or it doesn't have to be like Elvis Presley walking in the room. It can be a lot more subtle things, and that the more that we normalize it, the more that we can connect soul to soul instead of like roll to roll.
Now, this only because this is something that I like toy with my own kids, is because I do, at least I assume, I know how happy and playful in themselves they are at home. And actually, because we've been living this for so long, when we go out, they're pretty themselves also too. But did you ever come across was there ever a talk with your mom and dad or anything where it was like, the world is not this way really, so keep it to yourself? Or was that like not even a conversation? Because
Never a conversation.
and it's
Never.
not been a conversation with me either, but like also too, I'm like, walking into social situations and I'm also semi holding on to my roller coaster bar, like, oh, he's talking to them again. Oh boy, oh boy, oh, he got him. Like,
uh, well, kids are super intuitive, and they are, obviously you're very connected with your family. And so it's sort of the idea of how like they'll take your lead, and I
mm-hmm.
think that was how it was with my family. I mean, definitely I have in my life run into, let's say the word haters. Like I remember one time I went over to one of my friends' houses, and it was like a new friend, right? It's like I'm over, and I'm probably like 10, like I'm a kid, in 9, 10. And I'm sitting down at dinner with them, and her mom just sort of like looks at me and she's like, so your mom's the psychic? And I was like, yeah, so. And she's like, well then, you tell me something. And it was just this thing of like her trying to like challenge me, and I didn't
Yeah.
really get it. And she was just trying to like talk to me about my mom and about intuition, and like, but in a way of trying to make me feel like I have to prove myself.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home and feeling like, what was that? That was like, and because I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And one of the beautiful things that my mom said and taught both my sister and I is, you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
And and always gave me the out of, if this doesn't work for you or doesn't fit, like we don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so even teaching me as a kid to have boundaries around my own connection with spirit, that it's not about me. It's not about what it is that you think about it. You can think whatever you want. That's your own thing, but it's about how you feel and how I connect. And I felt very grateful for that. And so it's cool because I can just see that as a parent and as a role model, that you, that even though the world is always, who knows what's going to happen, right? But that you can teach them to be safe in their own bodies, connected to their own spirit. And that's not about anyone else. Because for me, having that connection is really a sense of knowing who it is that you are and being able to trust that in the world, no matter who shows up.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because even this morning in the shower, I was thinking about that. You know, when you like ask yourself questions like, hypothetically, if this happens, and I was thinking about that exact same thing, as in like, just like in religion or anything like that, like I can tell them what I think, but I have no right to sit there and perpetuate and keep thinking that I'm putting them down a certain line. Like, this is what I think, but whatever you believe in this time is for you, and that's where you need to be, and awesome. But I had a pep talk with myself in the shower about that.
Well, the thing is that leading by example, for me, having parents who led by example and who always, I would say one thing that I love about both my parents to this day is they still are learning and curious. So it's never been, and I've been teaching with my mom. I've been in workshops with my mom since I've been in diapers, but as now older, I've worked and traveled with her for the past 10 years. And I can even see in the evolution of her own life, how her teaching has evolved. And it's sort of like in the same way with my own connection with my own spirituality and intuition and all these things of not only having a parent who led by example,
Yeah.
but one who encouraged curiosity and growth, because that is also the portal to intuition. That's the portal to connectivity. When we wonder, when we're curious, we're open. And
Yeah.
that's where things are going to drop in instead of knowing, which is actually our intellect a lot of times masquerading as our high intellect. So, and a lot of times I find that sometimes parents, there are different parents. I've had there's 5 sensory parents and 6 sensory parents. And a lot of 5 sensory parents aren't that curious. And I actually find that even right now in terms of our world, that we really have to nurture curiosity, because it opens us up to play. It opens us up to our intuition. It opens us up to learning. It opens us up to guidance. And that's really the foundation to deeper listening,
Yeah.
is curiosity.
I didn't realize how much I had put that on the back burner, like as I got into my adult years, like almost that I just wasn't using it. And now, honestly, like if I had to say like my favorite qualities in a person, in myself, whatever, like curiosity is like number one, because with curiosity, like it blooms into love and so many things. But I'm with you on that one. I have a question. Would you say that either you or your sister were highly intuitive as children or highly sensitive when you came into the world?
Definitely. Both of us. But, we had very different ways. We are both very intuitive. Again, didn't even recognize it as intuition, because it was just, I was like, that's just the way we are. My
Yeah.
sister, especially, was incredibly sensitive. She had a lot of sleep anxiety, and she was just like an anxious kid.
Yeah.
I was also an anxious kid, but less so than my sister. And I find that a lot of kids who come in with that extra, with that just being super anxious or super sensitive, are a lot of times just very deep feelers, and that and having a world that is really and feeling things on so many different levels. It's like picking up on vibration and the vibe and all these different things, while also not necessarily having that much agency, because you're a kid, you aren't in control. You're only in control of very small things in your life.
Yeah.
That it's overwhelming. And so the one thing that I would say, especially that I really appreciated, was that our sensitivities weren't looked at as problems. I think that a lot of times when people have really sensitive, really anxious kids, it's thought of as like a problem that needs to be solved, which can make kids in themselves feel like they're a problem,
Yeah.
instead of that this part of yourself is really a gift, in being able to be so aware and connected. And how can we empower you with tools or different things so that you can feel like you have more agency or control, or even just different grounding routines.
Yeah.
Like, for even with my mom and I, whenever we would get overwhelmed, we'd have like a grounding routine, which was these very simple steps of, first of all, it was like checking in with our feeling body. What is it that I'm feeling? Where is it that it's coming from? How, if, like, for example, if we had a bad vibe when we were with our parents, we could do a double hand squeeze, and that meant we were out of there, no questions. If we were somewhere else, it was like put up your energetic shield or call on your guides or angels for help and support. Um, so it was that our sensitivities, and especially my sister was a very sensitive kid, but were not only nurtured, but that we had really creative problem solving. Like we were even chatting about earlier, it was like my sister had a lot of sleep anxiety, terrible sleep anxiety. And so we came at it from like every like angle. It was like and all the different things, including like a mommy doll, or past life regression, or learning how to connect with our guides and angels and different things, so that it was a place of where we could actually make like bedtime fun and not something that had to be an emergency.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Oh.
we had that. So and and I did all the things. I mean,
Yeah.
you sure you can say because you get desperate, but I was desperate, and a lot of parents. I was, because I just wanted to help, and then also too, when you become curious, you're like, what could this be? Like there's like a two side. Like I'm trying to help you, but what could this be? And what are all these things? Um. Okay. So now you get older. Did you ever like push away? Like how like a lot of teens will, teens or whatever, they'll be like, no, that's yours, and almost shut down. Did you do the shutdown?
Totally. I absolutely did the shutdown. Like I said, I went very closeted. I was like, okay, I am, because, at that age, not only did I want to differentiate, but I really wanted to blend. I feel like a lot of times in middle school and even in high high school, there were so many different times where I just didn't want to talk about it publicly. Or I mean, I even went through a whole period of like rebellion with my parents, totally, where I was like, I like smoked cigarettes, I was like, I'm an independent woman, dyed my hair blue, wore like bondage pants. But it was funny because my mom, and obviously my mom had a very normal reaction. She was worried, and because we grew up in such a connected family, and that disconnect is anxiety provoking, I think, for everyone. Me, I was trying to individuate and trying to become an adult, and my mom is trying to trust my spirit, but also like doesn't want me smoking cigarettes and wants to make sure that I'm on a good wants me to
Yeah.
grow up well. But and so it was interesting because we actually did end up in a very real power struggle, but we laugh because we say that I was Bambi with fangs, where I was still like my very sweet self, but there was a part of me that was like, go away. And actually, we got to a point where we just kept fighting. And my mom and I were both like, we don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. So we went to a therapist, this really interesting woman. We had this like all out fight. It was like, don't control me, all of it. And we left, and I will never forget sitting with my mom, and she was just like, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to make the choice to trust you. I trust your spirit. And it was this thing that relaxed in both of us in that moment, where it was like, okay, if you're going to start to be able to see me as an adult and start to trust me, then I'm going to act like an adult. And our relationship changed in that whole moment. So even growing up in an intuitive, connected family, we still had our poopy diapers. I don't know if you could swear, but like
that's the best.
Yeah.
That's the best description of it ever.
Yeah. Like we had and that's the thing, even having this family, our family was very normal.
Yeah.
Like we fought, we deeply loved each other, but we also always came back and knew that we could trust not only each other's spirit, but also have good communication. Like we could talk about all of it, it was like, and that was, I think, another thing that was really wonderful in having not only an intuitive household, but that and having people who were curious and wanted to grow was and even to this day with my mom or my sister or my dad, when something's not working or something I feel either of us where we need to call each other on it, we do in a loving way. And we really make an attempt to, communicate, but make those shifts and also just hear and understand each other, which is really cool. Because I think sometimes, and a lot of times, a big thing that I see with my clients and that I see even with my friends is that there can be a lot of like one-way authority where it's like, I know best and you don't have a vote and you don't I'm not going to listen to you. And how that teaches kids, to not only like be invisible, but also to work in this place of constantly having to be good. And good takes us away from being able to be messy, which means that we can't play, which gets us stuck in our heads, which puts us in a place of constantly trying to like people please. Yeah. So, we are a very, very normal family, but yes, definitely. And it was sort of like, as soon as that happened, it allowed me to sort of reclaim that part of my identity as myself instead of feeling like I had to rebel against my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's like some science experiment that they did where like with chimpanzees where like, even if they know the answer to a problem, say they do it 100 times or whatever, they will still like 90%, like 10% of the time purposely do it the opposite way just to see.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then it solidifies like which way, you know what I mean? What way felt right to them. And I had a guest on here who said like, failure is so important. Like doing this is so important because it lets you like lets you understand the feeling between the difference of what works for you and what doesn't, and the feeling of what needs to change and what doesn't, and that there's a purpose to it.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like, first of all, in terms of just even with chimpanzees and being, or, having to know how to do things differently than our parents or whoever our model is, because you have to be able to try and do things your own way. That causes you to like trust yourself in life, and that we can make a lot of mistakes, and mistakes are not only really good learning grounds, but it doesn't mean that we're in danger. And I find the biggest thing that I find that pulls us away from our intuition, from even connectivity, from all these things, as we get so afraid of making a mistake or failing. When failure doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that this is a learning experience. And that also, if we can inject humor into it, and, you know, I mean, I've failed at 1,000 different things, and it's not, because if we also don't allow ourselves to fail, we don't allow ourselves to participate. Our world becomes so small, because it's like, this is the only island that I know that I'm safe. Instead of failing or quote unquote failing, isn't really failing. It's just a learning.
Yeah, it's
and
like learning is another piece. We're just learning a different piece.
And totally love that.
Also too is like, we have to be able to fail or do something different, because like, you know, what was going on for my great grandmother is not going on, was what was different from my grandmother to my mother to me and my kids. So like, I can tell you what I do and that it works, but first thing, you're a separate person. Second thing, you're in a completely different world, and you might be being pulled to do something, do it differently, because that's how it needs to be done now for you. So like, different time.
Yeah. And that you can teach your kids to trust their own process.
Yes.
You know, it's like, and I think the one thing that I love, even coming from this intergenerational family, and one thing that I see is that by having a family that teaches me to do things my own way, I can like stand on their shoulders in a sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what worked for my Nana, who then was like, trust your intuition, do it your way, who does it for my mom, who does it very uniquely to me, and that there's no right way to do, and like pretty much anything. And especially when it comes to the laboratory of life, you know, obviously like there's a right way to like wash your clothes. You want to put the soap, you know, you need soap, but there's so many other things where it's like that there's no way to do it right. And the moment that we do that, we don't allow ourselves to trust our own spontaneity, which is where magic and genius is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So with your dad then, because your dad met your mom and she was already obviously in this world. How is it for you in that household? Because I've noticed now, having talked to more and more people, their spouse is usually like a fabulous grounding force. You know, despite who's in what position. But I'd be loved to hear like what your dad was like in this whole scenario with all of you guys.
Yeah, I would say two things. In a lot of ways, yes, he was a nerd. He is. I mean, so he's, you know, he would like make dinner and you know, loved to like garden, and was it was sort of like, I grew up in a household where not only the roles were reversed, but my mom doesn't like to cook. It's not her thing. My dad loves to cook. He, you know, loves to like decorate the house and bake, you know, Halloween decorations and things like that. He loves an event. But I also was really fortunate because I had a dad who was curious and had his own spiritual connection even before my mom. I think that obviously being married to my mom accelerated that in a lot of different ways, but that he had his own like meditation practice and his own, and he actually used to teach meditation, was a massage therapist, was actually in printing for offering envelopes through like a family business. But my dad was very much an artist. He's very much a creative, and was the best because he was a really beautiful champion and support system to having a lot of women in the house. You know, he was was all, you know, a lot. I find that a lot of times now that I'm older, I realize what a privilege it was to have a dad who would get like right in there with me and all the things and everything, Even for example, I remember when I first got my period, my dad like bought me flowers and was like, welcome to being a woman, without being like, oh, but when then also like take me skiing. So, but he was definitely a grounding force for all of us, even in just how he nurtured us.
Yeah.
So, but I think that spirituality and curiosity and connection was at the heart of both my parents' lives, just expressed in different ways.
Different ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can relate in that. I had, my grandfathers, I wouldn't necessarily put them as spiritual. One has passed away and one's alive. But
Wow.
like this, like both of them were like, for instance, my one grandfather was like, I wanted 6 girls, but my wife made me stop at 4. And
Oh.
then like my other grandfather was like, they asked him, I think with the first grandchild, he's like, what do you want? He goes, do you want it to be a boy or girl? He goes, I only want girl grandchildren and with freckles. Right.
Oh.
And then
Oh.
there was 7 granddaughters right in a row. And like, I
Oh.
mean, he took us everywhere. Like he was like, load him. Like we were with him all the time, but there is just something about having these men that just like you said, like are champions in this the world of being all the women's stuff. And like I will forever be so grateful for that.
It's really wonderful to have, and I think especially nowadays, as we're seeing this really massive shift in like patriarchy. And I mean patriarchy in the sense of, there's the masculine and the feminine. Feminine
Yeah.
is intuition and receptivity. And this isn't gender specific,
No, yeah.
Obviously, but having men who are connected to their own heart space
Yeah.
and how we need each other to have role models of connected, curious, available men who can, be a grounded container for women.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's such a beautiful, wonderful thing. I love your grandpa's like, everybody get in the car, we're going out, instead
Yep.
of certain men who aren't as in touch or haven't been modeled as much as with their own femininity or their own feminine parts of themselves. So we get really like uncomfortable. And I feel sad because that's a really important place of where we need to like learn and be connected to each other. But I really find that that's shifting, which is super
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. I just wish people would be a little bit more careful. They so badly, I'm all for like women's stuff, but like they really want to, like women can do this and men can't. And I'm like, we're trying to switch the other way when men were saying this about women. Can we not like people?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I feel like anytime there's a big shift, it's kind of like the pendulum swings where it goes all the way to one way and then all the way to the other way. And, but more than anything, in terms of, because I'm also the big belief that only men can teach like boys how to be men, that like women can't do it, that we
Yeah.
need to have, just like a man can't teach a woman how to be like a woman. And
Yeah.
so this real shift of having more male leaders in the world is something that I also find really exciting. And I'm really curious to just see how these big shifts in even just like languaging or connectivity or even emotion is something that's so rapidly changing. And so am excited for like I love looking at like Gen Z, like the kids now. They're so much further down the path than I was. I find that they're such
Yeah.
builders and creatives and problem solvers, and that there's so much sometimes the older generations with these misconceptions that they're just always on their phones or whatever. But what I
Yeah.
feel is that they're really here to change the world, and that it's so exciting. It's
Yeah.
really exciting. Yeah.
I'm with you on that one wholeheartedly, like big
uh,
time. But I feel like I'm always quieted at parties because it's like not not the norm yet. Hopefully soon. And I wanted to ask you, I asked you this a little bit earlier, was because you're in this very, interesting life path and everything, did you and your family ever do any exploring into why you incarnated together, why you ended up together?
It's interesting because as to why we incarnated together, I feel like it's a soul mission.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I find no one in my family was like, there was no pressure on me at all to follow this path, or my sister at all. My mom and dad were very, very supportive of whatever it was that we wanted to do. So I believe it's a soul mission, but B, it's fun because, as I was saying right before, there's always been a lot of curiosity. I just was going through my storage space and found like in my natal chart from when I was born. And I think that my mom and dad wanted to learn about, just us as particular spirits and what all the things were that they could do to help encourage or nurture us in all the different ways, like from our teachers at school to getting charts done to, talking to us all in a very clear way. But as to like why we incarnated, I find that what we've really seen and felt is that we really incarnated to really be teachers and ambassadors of not only spirituality, but personal power and creativity. And that this is like a mission, and that mission is something that I feel like is handed down from like the divine in a lot of different ways, because it is such a unique thing to do, but the best. We are here, and I feel like in terms of all the different things, to be of service. That's really at the heart of not only our mission, but I think especially what my sister and I have been taught in terms of integrity and how to teach. This is a really exciting world, but people who are oftentimes who, like for me, it was very normal, but a lot of times who come to this later in life are really in a moment of crisis.
Yeah.
And they're really looking for better help and support, and to really understand that this is a mission not only isn't about like us, it's really about having an incredible level of respect and dignity and space and to empower other people. So I feel like all the charts and things say like this is your soul mission, but I feel like more than that, because even in readings and things, we always have power and we always have choice. So I feel like it's just was a calling that we all answered the phone. I don't think I think if I wasn't doing this, I would be doing this in just like another form.
In another form.
Yeah. Like I think my boyfriend and I were talking, and one of the things we were asking each other was like, what would you do if you weren't doing what we're like, in video, both of us have very strong missions. And I was like, I don't know. I would have to be in some sort of profession to helping people trust themselves. I couldn't even really think about it.
I don't even know. I don't think I've ever even asked myself that since everything has changed, like in the past 3 or 4 years. Like, I'm with you. Like, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably be an actress, but that's interesting because I've never acted a day in my life.
But I love that. But I think that acting though is in its best way, like channeling. That is spontaneity, playing, being connected to the moment, and trusting outside of yourself, because you have to act with a partner and really allowing yourself to like empathize and connect with somebody's experience in order to do it well. So I feel like even acting and good acting is really just intuition in a whole other package, in a sense.
Do you ever play, which I know you do, this is like, I don't even know why it's, but like the reason I feel like also like why I am, or the people in this highly intuitive world, like our drug of choice is to know what somebody else is going through. Like, and you know what I mean? To understand, I mean, like understand all the parts. Like for me, that is like, I want to understand. I want I guess it's why, like, you know, why you even come to be as a human, because you're exploring a whole other piece of what it is to be part of the collective consciousness, be part of the piece. And I mean, we all do it in different ways, but
Yeah. And I also just find that a lot of times people who are light workers or deep sea divers, you know, um, really wanting, I think for me it's like in a lot of ways like understanding, but also like nerding out on how to give people tools to make their lives feel more connected and better,
yeah,
you know, while also trusting other people's spirit. You know, like
yeah,
there are so many different people who incarnate and have so many different life paths. And I uh, genuinely in my heart feel that a life connected to your authentic self, to your intuition, to your personal power is the one that we're naturally designed to live. But also just having to respect that everybody has their own choice, and
yeah,
that's important to respect that and to like, yeah, listen. But I get it. It's like wanting to, because I think what it really is wanting to deeply connect with people,
yeah.
you
Oh,
know?
yeah, that's probably exactly it. You know, yeah. I mean, isn't that why people read books, for instance? Is like, I want to understand how this person felt in that moment. And then also, too, how would I question it in that moment? And the same thing with acting or um, music. I mean, that's just like sheer feeling. I mean,
Mm. Yeah, for me music, I listen to music all the time. I love it so much. But yeah, being able to empathize with others, because at the end of the day it's like we all are walking our own path, but there are so many core things that make us and I think for me that's what I think about the language of spirit is like, and versus ego.
yeah,
Spirit is how are we the same, while ego is how are we different.
yeah,
And so using that, even in respecting different choices, but not yeah, and having just more compassion.
yeah. So now you've been doing all these workshops. You've done a lot of workshops over the years. Um, with your mom, with yourself, um, what, I guess, like, tell me about that, but also to like, what have you learned in that? Because I'm sure there's a huge development piece for you in that.
Well, um, first of all, I would say what I've learned uh, uh, a lot. Having, I mean, workshops, you know, we teach personal development workshops. So I teach a lot of workshops on very grounded tools on how to get reconnected to your intuition,
Right.
how to connect back to yourself. And working with my sister or my mom, um, the thing that I really see so often, and I think the thing is that there are so many people who are not only curious and available, it takes a lot of courage, effort, and availability to take your time, energy, resources to show up in
Yeah.
a classroom. There's a certain courage and a certain spirit about anyone who's wanting to learn. Um, but what I really find the most is that, and the thing that I find, yeah, is that people get so in their heads and forget how to play
Yeah.
and really trust themselves. But that once they experience that, once they even have, uh, because, you know, how I was taught to teach and how my mom teaches is through an experience instead of more information. Now we're in
Yeah.
information overload.
Yep.
Um, but that it, and I think the other thing that I find is that people are incredible and so resilient and so interesting and have such like depth. Like we just did a workshop I taught a workshop with my mom just a few weeks ago, all about getting in touch with your guides. And to see people's availability and transformation and curiosity and is not only my favorite way to teach, but my favorite thing to see. You know, I learned that I'm just a facilitator and that it's not about me. It's about really just creating the space for spirit, and that's what will teach and lead. And that's what will that's where people will feel and have an actual shift.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Mm.
All right. I'm going to ask one last question just for fun. Can you give me one memory from your childhood? Because I've just been doing this with myself, because I was like, I wasn't highly intuitive, where I sit there and play, and where I'm like, that was a moment that I can notice now where I really was like chalk in my intuition. And just like, do you have a memory like that?
Oh,
Like a
totally.
million.
I feel like, well, I mean, here's the thing too, though. And I find this thing about intuition, for anyone who wants to develop their intuition, start talking about it. Start
Yeah.
putting those places out loud, because then you'll start to anchor in. So I'm just in practice, you know, I feel like I'm sure that, and that's the fun thing too, when I talk to my clients about readings, or when I do a reading, or when I'm really mentoring people, it's like, once you start talking about it, you realize, wow, I've had so many experiences where I've been super intuitive. But I feel like one of the ones that was just off the top of my head was, I was a kid, and I remember my mom laying in her bed and me going in. I was like, Mom, where is the vampire? I know that you got me a vampire book. Where is it? And she had bought me this book that was like this really fun picture book all about vampires that she hadn't given me, that I had no idea about. And that she was just like, you blew the surprise. Here you go, you know? So just that's one that's off the top of my head that I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that I was trying to think of any that, and you have a hard time. And I can't think of any off the top of my head now, because but
Well, even if you think about one like recently, and a lot
oh
of
my God, I
times
have like a bazillion from recently.
yeah, exactly. It's like, once you start to talk about it, it's almost like a string of pearls, where it's like, then it's this pearl and this pearl and this pearl and this pearl.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that that's a question of yours, because I think that that's such a really powerful way to start to not only expect our intuition to work, but recognize that we're already intuitive and it's not something outside of ourselves.
I think why I was looking into it so much is because, just out of sheer interest, like I'm like, where did I shut it down? You know what I mean? Just out of interest, like if I can remember up to a certain point, at what point did I shut it off and start, you know what I mean? As shut it off as quote unquote, but like, no, I'm going to not believe in that right now, or that's childish, so that's what I was trying to trace back for myself.
Well, I think it's hard, because when our intuition as a kid, especially if we don't have families that have been in the practice of validating it,
Yeah.
It's these, because intuition is a lot of subtle, no big deal things.
Yep.
It's a little hit, it's a turn left, at this or that opens up to these bigger places. And when it isn't something that's validated, it's when we start to doubt ourselves. And so it's when we start to stop connecting with our bodies, or paying attention to those little nudges, hits. Like, and I say usually, like for kids, usually it happens maybe like 7, 8, 9, when their world becomes a lot, keeps getting bigger and bigger. And where that part just isn't as validated, talked about, normalized. And where kids also just start to want to like fit in with their friends, it's and that's normal. So just normalizing it for ourselves and taking back the conversation.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. And where can my listeners find you? I will say you have some amazing videos on your website and on YouTube, which are so nice and concise, like for people to start out with,
Thank you.
You just moved on Instagram to your own
Yes.
page.
Yes.
But where else what can they find you? Give me a rundown.
All right. So all the different things. I feel like, so my sister and I have a book, You Are Amazing,
Yes.
published from Hay House. You can get it on Amazon. It's a great, like, fun read. You can find me on Instagram at Sonia Choquette Tully, or on YouTube at Sonia Choquette Tully. You can find Sabrina and I at Sonia and Sabrina.com. And if you're curious about your soul purpose or things, you can book a reading with me. And I also do intuitive mentoring. So if you're like intuitive and really need help and support, you can go to my website, and I have like a fun little discovery call so we can see if it's working together to be a good fit. But other than that, I have a bunch of tools, a bunch of things. Use them. Also, if you ever need specific help with tools, feel free to like email me or message me, and I'll happily do a video on it.
I'm so glad that you're doing that intuitive mentoring part, because I just had another person that just came up with it, because it's needed. Because, you know, even with me doing this podcast, I get people who contact me and they're like, I need help. Like, they're like, I opened up, you know, I'm finally opened up to this, and, you know, the flood comes in and they just don't know what they're looking at. They're like, my radio won't stop talking to me. And, you know, I can guess this and I can do this. And it's just more or less, I think just getting excited about it and not knowing what to do with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the thing is we all need support.
Yeah.
And I've had really good teachers. You know, I'm a good teacher, and helping people to not only be able to take ownership of their tools, but their intuition, and also being able to like raise the antenna, and also just in being able to be validated. So you can start to have that be more as an embodied experience instead of that place of, am I intuitive? Do I know what I'm doing?
Yeah.
So you can start really trusting yourself and life and your spirit. And it's my favorite thing to do. Like, these are my favorite things to do. So I just like plug people back into themselves, and I'm like, yes, you're doing a great job. And it's super fun. I feel very, very, very privileged to do this work and be on this soul mission.
Good. I'm so glad that you're doing this work, and I'm so glad to spread it and be a part. And
yes. And I'm so grateful for you and the work that you're doing. This is so important and so vital. And having grown up in a world that didn't have this as an intuitive, connected kid, and for you in helping to not only normalize, but encourage conversation and give people all these different resources of support, I can't tell you how grateful I am.
It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch others, children and parents struggle when their parents are viewing their child as broken or something like that. And I'm like, no, perspective change.
Yeah. I feel like you need a software update.
Oh my God, I love you.
I love you too.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Please stay in touch. Thank you so much.